Thank you. So, what is bankruptcy and what is foreclosure in your world? And how does that affect people's ability to re-enter back into the market to repurchase?
Hmm.
In,
Don't scream at once.
Well, I mean,
Yeah,
yeah,
it's a,
I feel
it's
like I'm like dominating the show right now.
No,
So,
no, you could. No,
go ahead,
oh,
go
no,
ahead, go
we're all
ahead.
bouncing. I mean, we're all
It's a
bouncing.
lot.
I mean, I would say, and I'll just start with the bankruptcy. I would say that bankruptcy used to be two kinds. Actually, at one point, it was one kind of bankruptcy to me in the lending, which was a Chapter 7, which was a forget about it. And long gone are the days, and I think we've all been in the business a while ago. I rarely see Chapter 7s anymore at this particular point. I see a lot of Chapter 13 bankruptcies, which are repayment plans and things of that nature. So bankruptcy doesn't mean a death sentence on purchasing a property, but with FHA, it's definitely going to be a 2-year from the time of discharge, 24 months. So that's something that we'll touch on, and then I'll let Gary. Maybe you can do VA, and then Mr. Gupta might do conventional. We can kind of bounce off the ideas that way.
sure.
I think conventional it is 4 years.
Yeah, 4 to 7.
4,
Yeah,
yes,
4 to
7 is
7.
for the foreclosures.
Yeah, extenuating circumstances in certain cases,
Right.
but I've never seen, I've never had one. Yeah.
No, yeah, and that's actually I've an extenuating circumstance by, I guess I'll say HUD, which is FHA. Their definition is, I would say, point blank, death of a primary wage earner. Period. That's it.
Yeah.
I've had some really sad stories that I've tried to put through. Underwriting's agreed, but you send it out to FHA and they say no. And there's nothing you can do about it once they say no. But to get back to your original question, I feel like a lot of times foreclosures and bankruptcies really go hand in hand, but they're extremely important to make sure you understand the difference. A bankruptcy is basically, specifically Chapter 7, where essentially you're in a situation you can't do it anymore. You got to throw up your hands and just say, I got to restart, for whatever reason. Okay. That forgives you of the debt. Okay. With a foreclosure, that's where essentially the bank has now repossessed the property. And those may sound the same, but they're completely different, and it becomes a stumbling block, which most consumers don't understand. So you can actually include a mortgage and a bankruptcy and continue to live in the house. I've seen it for 3, 5, 7, 10 years. Okay. Where the bank doesn't actually repossess the property and turn it over. And the reason being, this is probably a little bit of truth, a little bit of my opinion, is that if you're living in the house, you're going to maintain the house. You're going to pay the taxes. You're going to pay the insurance. You're going to keep the grass cut. You're going to keep everything in working order. Whereas if once the bank takes it, now that bank is now the responsibility of the bank, and whoever in it, they kick them out. So now the bank, until they can sell it, has to pay the insurance, pay the taxes, maintain the property, make sure utilities are there, make sure everything's upkept. So, and a lot of times people will include the bankruptcy or include the mortgage in a bankruptcy,
Right.
and keep making payments voluntarily. And if you've ever seen a statement, it actually specifically says, we are not sending you this notice to collect the debt, which means the bank stops reporting the collection of payments to the credit bureau. And until you've actually seasoned the foreclosure, which on FHA is 3 years, VA 2 years, conventional 4 to 7, your seasoning requirement for that 3 to potentially 7 years never starts. And so if you have a bankruptcy, especially if you've owned a property, you need to make sure if you're going to keep maintaining that property, you reaffirm the debt, which is essentially where you go to your bankruptcy attorney and say, I'm washing my hands of all debts except for the mortgage, because now you're only seasoning the bankruptcy as of the discharge date, not the foreclosure, which would be as of the date that the bank transfers that title to someone else, which is ultimately when the bank resells the property. So I've had multiple scenarios where I've looked at credits and I've seen where they've, done the bankruptcy, included the mortgage 10 years ago, but the bank didn't resell that property until 2 years ago, and they're just out of luck.
Yeah.
And they're like, no, I included it. Well, They're two completely
You can
different
do a
things.
refinance. You can do a refinance if you reaffirm that mortgage. You can do a refinance, put it under your name, and then done with it. So that you can do that also.
Wow, that's a lot of technicality. I'm just like, whew.
Yeah, exactly. That's a
Yeah.
lot.
One, yeah,
So
one
you
thing I
can
would
do
add.
oh, sorry.
No,
Go
no,
on.
no. One thing I was going to add to Gary is that I think we would all agree, because it seems like all of us, we might have similar lending backgrounds in helping customers. Bankruptcies and foreclosures are definitely not mortgage death sentences at all.
No.
They're timetables that are attached to them. But specifically, what I really try to stress to consumers, just from, because we're all also professionals, is that lates after the bankruptcy is one thing I highly, you cannot have lates after bankruptcy. Because essentially specifically with, let's say, government agencies like, and we'll talk about VHDA a little bit later, they look at it really, really with a fine microscope, because basically what you're saying is that all of my debt has been wiped away. I have a new start, but even after the bankruptcy, I was having financial issues and troubles. And I always say to clients, if you were the lender, would you lend you money? That's the best way to look at it. And if you would say, I'd be a little bit hesitant, well, think about a bank that wants to lend you $300,000 or $400,000 if you've already had a previous financial extenuating circumstance, and now you're getting back reacclimated, you got your job back, and you're back on your feet, and you're still having late payments. So if you do have to go through those, think about it from the right consumer standpoint. No late payments, paying your bills on time, keeping credit and things of that nature to a minimum, even after reestablishment. Because in our business, and I think you guys can attest to this, sometimes clients, after a bankruptcy or after foreclosure, they go out and they get a whole bunch of a ton of new credit cards. And then in a 6-month period of time, I'm telling you, Anita, it's like clockwork. You'll see one small late, two small late.
Yep.
Keep everything at a minimum. Become a cash cow. Start thinking like, you know what, I'm going to put money, whatever you have to do to keep your expenses at a minimum, that's what you should be doing. But that's one thing in 15 years doing this, it always gets a client, it makes their loans hard to get approved. And sometimes they don't get approved at all. Trying not to have lates after you've had that bankruptcy or foreclosure, because lenders are really looking at that. Specifically now in our credit climate now, the expectation should be, if the microscope was this small, now it's going to get this small.
Wow. That is good information. So what I'm hearing is, even though you may file bankruptcy or be in foreclosure, you can still come back and repurchase, but you have to keep your bills in order, like making quick payments, living within your budget to make sure you are at a good credit space where you are credit worthy for lenders to give you money to purchase.
Right. You said it perfectly.
Okay, that is good information. So I think we've talked about, no, let's dive into the different types of financing options